You know, Martin Luther King Day, everybody always plays the I Have a Dream speech. I'm sure you've heard it a million times. But remember that what King was calling for, he was calling for us to live out the meaning of our creeds. In other words, saying our creed is a good one. We have to live it out, and saying to judge people by the content of their characters, not by the color of skin. What leftist does that now? What leftist does that? And the one thing they're always bringing out is they're bringing out the fact that he had socialist leanings, that in private, he would talk about the fact that he was probably a socialist. Now, this to me is like saying that George Washington owned slaves, okay? Socialism is bad. It is unfair. It's stealing people's money. It's taking away your time, which is your life, and saying that more powerful people than you have a right to decide what to do with it. But in that day, that was back in the 60s, right? There was still some reason to believe that socialism could work out. We still didn't know everything we later found out about the Soviet Union. He was against communism. And the reason he was against communism was because of its this is quoting from him, its materialistic interpretation of history that denied religion and its ethical relativism and its political totalitarianism. In other words, he didn't like its leftism. He didn't like its leftism. I think he was wrong about socialism, but we all have our flaws. But listen to a speech that he made to a junior high school telling the kids there, who were largely black, how they should live their life. This is cut number 2, talking about what they should put into their lives.
Do that job so well that the living, the dead, or the unborn couldn't do it any better. If it falls your lot to be a street sweeper, sweep streets like Michelangelo painted pictures. Sweep streets like Beethoven composed music. Sweep streets like Leontine Price sings before the Metropolitan Opera. And sweep streets like Shakespeare wrote poetry. Sweep streets so well that all the host of heaven and earth will have to pause and say, here lived a great street sweeper who swept his job well.
That's an amazing thing to tell people. First of all, think about this, what he's talking about, and he says this in this speech later on. He talks about don't let anybody deny you your significance. And he's talking about, he calls it your somebodyness, which I just love, a great phrase, your somebodyness. He's telling you, you are somebody no matter what you do. Because in this society right now, especially on the left, we talk so much about what people do, and we do not talk enough about who they are. We don't talk about what, I hear people talking about motherhood as if, it's taking you out of the market, as if the market were the most important thing about you. This was a guy who understood, because he was a Christian, because he was a pastor of Jesus Christ and a preacher of Jesus Christ, he understood that a person's significance goes beyond this moment, goes beyond this time, and certainly goes beyond the marketplace. And just compare this to the way the left talks today. Compare it to the way they tell you that you're a victim, that you can't do anything, that you have to confess your white privilege. But everybody is born with some kind of advantage or disadvantage. He's telling you that no matter what your lot is, you're significant. That message has been lost. And that's why I think we should really celebrate this day and reclaim it for the values that Martin Luther King actually espoused. You want to see what the part of the left that triumphed in the interim between Martin Luther King's day and our day? Let's go back to Bernie Sanders, all right? This is Bernie Sanders giving a speech back in those days about the revolution in Cuba that brought them under the tyrannical rule of communism, and how he hated both the Republicans and the Democrats, because in those days, both the Republicans and the Democrats were against communism. And, I sometimes just want to come in one day and just play JFK speeches, because if he doesn't sound like a Republican, nobody does. This is the left. This is the left that has taken over the Democrat Party since Martin Luther King's day. Listen to what Bernie Sanders says.
I was very excited and impressed by the Cuban Revolution. And there was Kennedy and Nixon talking about which particular method they should use about destroying the revolution. And I remember the irony, as we learned the history later on, Kennedy was saying that Nixon was too soft on communism. Let me pick up a point that Rick was making. In Cuba, we should deal firmly with Fidel Castro. And Nixon was playing the role of, hey, you got to be patient. You can't do these things. You got to negotiate. Well, of course, what he was upset about is that secretly they were planning the Bay of Pigs invasion right then. But for security reasons, he couldn't come out and say, we're already planning the destruction of the Cuban Revolution, don't worry about it. So he was the liberal, and Kennedy was playing the conservative. And actually, when you read novels, people say there's a sick feeling in your stomach. Usually I'm sufficiently unemotional not to be sick, but I actually got up in the room and almost left to puke. Because for the first time in my adult life, what I was seeing is the Democrats and the Republicans, both of them, and of course, as Rick points out, Kennedy was the flashing young liberal. And what we were seeing right before my eyes, way, way back then, and I didn't know anything about politics, but clearly that there really wasn't a whole lot of difference between the two.
Boo! You suck!
We just threw that in. That wasn't part of the speech. Yeah, there wasn't a difference between the two in opposing evil. Both sides opposed the evil of communism, as did Martin Luther King. When he talked about socialism, he was talking about the unfairness in capitalism. I've said before that capitalism doesn't cover everything. We need a capitalism basically governed by Christian principles. You cannot have capitalism on its own because people are wicked. They're broken and sinful, and they will do things to each other they shouldn't do. No system covers everything. We have to be dedicated to doing right. We just have to be. However, Martin Luther King opposed communism. That's the side that Bernie Sanders is now one of the front runners in the Democrat presidential race. That's the side that took over the Democrat Party. Before you go, one last thing. Hit the subscribe button so that you stay up to date on all our content.